Good morning, race fans. Well, I did it. I caved in and finally watched the F1 movie. A few weeks ago, I made a video explaining why I didn't want to watch the movie. There were just several things in the trailers and things that I had read in articles that did not sit with me the right way and just generally made me not want to go see it. But a lot of you in the comments of that video told me that maybe I should watch the movie before forming an opinion on it, and you know what? Yeah, fair enough. That's a very valid point, honestly. So I'm here to remedy that by bringing you my honest review of the movie. Let the record show that I actually do read every single one of your comments, and I really do appreciate all your feedback on this stuff, because it helps me improve the content on my channel, and it helps me to know when maybe I've done something or said something that you all didn't like. So thank you all for that, for leaving me your honest opinions, even if some of y'all were a little mean, I'm not gonna lie. Also, this video will definitely have pretty heavy spoilers for the movie. Fair warning. Anyway, let's get right into it. Let me start by saying something positive about the movie. Visually speaking, this movie is the GOAT of racing movies. The sound and the visuals are fantastic throughout, and I think that makes the racing scenes easily the best part of the movie just with that. All the different shots of the car and the track and all the little details that they managed to capture. It's just so well done, and I'm wondering, why can't we film actual F1 races in this way? I know why, it's because it would be insanely expensive, but you know, Apple already figured out how to put a tiny iPhone camera in a car. Why can't we just do that always? Actually, I think one of my favorite parts of the movie was toward the end with Sonny Hayes' last lap around Abu Dhabi. We're just kind of like in the zone and we're seeing him going through the lap from a first-person perspective, and it feels like we're on the track going with him. That, I think, is very beautiful. I also really liked the race starts for some reason, because you really do feel the tension of what it must be like inside the car. Like sometimes during F1 races, when they show the race start replays, you see kind of the inside of the cockpit view from some drivers, but I feel like with all the sound and the drama of the movie and the cinematography, the sensation was really amplified. Like you really felt like you were the driver inside the car and waiting for the race to start. I think it was really well achieved. Also, great soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, as always. Hell, even all the like super cliche classic rock Led Zeppelin bits, I even enjoyed that. Which, I mean, I do just love classic rock, but you get what I mean. Overall, I think in terms of the audio and visuals, they did a really good job at getting to what a Grand Prix feels like, not just from the perspective of the drivers, but also the fans who are there in the stands, but also the fans watching at home in a way. It was well done, and I hope that it gives newer fans an understanding of what it's like for us. Now, going more into the actual plot of the movie, it's basically the most cliche and predictable thing ever. The very basic premise of the movie is that Brad Pitt's character, Sonny Hayes, is a driver who's been retired from Formula One for 30 years, and he gets hired again mid-season by a backmarker team, Apex GP, because they've scored 0 points in 2.5 years, and if they don't win a race by the end of the season, then the team will probably get sold off. They're kind of like Sauber, basically, but worse. And Hayes has to work with his teammate Joshua Pierce, who is like this hotshot rookie, and obviously they don't get along at first, but they need to put aside their differences for the sake of the team and that sort of thing. And of course, Sonny Hayes is like this rebel who doesn't play by the rules, and he gets out on track and he keeps doing these crazy things, and the team is like, oh my god, what are you doing? This is crazy, this will never work. And of course it works every time. It's kind of supposed to be a rehash of Top Gun Maverick because it's by the same director. So essentially the same kind of cliche action blockbuster type movie. And you know, that type of story is entertaining on a basic level. Like, I can't say I was bored watching the movie. It was very fun. But there were some things in the plot that, as an F1 fan, I was kind of like, make it make sense. Like, the thing with Brad Pitt's character being 60 years old is still wild to me. I'm sorry, but how does Sonny Hayes rock up to Apex GP being 60 years old, having been retired from Formula One for 30 years, and whose only training consists of doing some push-ups and balancing his neck on the bed and bouncing some tennis balls around, getting in the same car as his teammate who is a rookie, but still an actual F1 driver with modern training and understanding of how Formula One is today, trying to beat his teammate's lap time, crashing the car at the end of the lap, and still beating his lap time. How is this scene even approved? Also, like, the whole movie, Joshua is doing this very modern, high-tech training, but by the end of the movie, he kind of switches over to Sonny Hayes' old school training with the tennis balls or whatever. And it's supposed to be seen as like a good thing, but I don't know, like, is it really a good thing? Like, I feel like that's not enough training to drive a modern Formula One car, but I mean, what do I know? Once again, I'm just kind of upset at all the mental gymnastics that this movie's doing to justify bringing in Brad Pitt at 61 years old. Like, I think they mentioned Louis Chiron, I think that's how you say his name, and Javier Bardem is like, oh no, you're good, because this guy was 55 when he was driving, so you're fine. And it's like, yeah, he was. In the 1950s, Formula One has changed a lot. I'm not saying it's impossible that there would be a 60-year-old driver, but it seems unlikely, considering how difficult it is to drive one of these cars. But I don't know, the way things are going for Alonso, I think he might do it. I don't know if it's because they really wanted to hire Brad Pitt, which is a little sus, or because they really wanted to say that the main character raced against Schumacher and Senna, so that they can, like, name drop these two legends, and even show them in the case of Senna. It's probably a mix of factors because Plan B is involved in the making of the movie, but I don't know, I'm just a little annoyed because it makes the movie kind of unrealistic as a result on that front. I just kind of wish they'd chosen a younger actor. And then another thing that bothers me about the plot is that there seems to be, in general, a lot of incongruity between what the movie shows F1 to be and what F1 is actually like. And yes, of course, I knew going into this movie that it's made for entertainment purposes, and so the races were not going to be 100% realistic, right? Like, if you want to watch a 100% accurate F1 race, then you might as well watch an F1 race. But I do think some of the choices they made in the races were a little too extreme in my opinion. Like, why was Sonny Hayes low-key committing Crashgate light? During the race in Hungary, Hayes continually makes contact with other drivers on purpose to force safety cars to come out. It's not as serious as actual Crashgate, like it's not a big crash, it's maybe he's breaking Pierre Gasly's front wing or something. But it's enough to trigger safety cars, and he is doing it on purpose. I will say though, the fact that it's after this race that Fernando Alonso goes up to Brad Pitt and says, "Good race," that was pretty funny, I have to admit it. There's also a race where Hayes is in like 10th place or something, and he goes to pit, and then he stays in the pits for like 30 seconds, waiting for race leader Max Verstappen to come by. And then when Verstappen comes by, Hayes gets out of the pits and gets in front of Max, who is trying to lap him, obviously. But he holds off Max Verstappen for as long as he can so that his teammate can catch up, and then he gives him a tow. I can't remember if he actually gets a penalty for impeding Max Verstappen, but they do talk about him potentially getting a 5-second penalty. This one, I guess, is not too bad. I mean, we literally saw Alonso doing something similar, I think back in Austria, like a few races ago. But purposely waiting in the pit lane to impede another driver is kind of crazy. And then in the Silverstone race, Hayes actively ignores team orders, which I guess is not like illegal, but it's usually not a good look for drivers when they do that. And he also calls a lot of the strategy throughout the movie. And like, yeah, normally drivers do make suggestions to the team about what they think the strategy should be, but ultimately it's the pit wall who makes the calls. And I don't know, you'd think that a group of people whose job it is to do strategy would know better than the driver in most cases. Like, if Hayes was driving for Ferrari, then I would understand, but it's not the case. So I just find it interesting that the driver does a better job than the actual strategy team the entire movie. So I guess my overall problem with this is not exactly that the scenes are inaccurate to real races per se, because it's true that they do make the movie a lot more interesting, because you have this surprise element of, oh, what is Sonny Hayes gonna come up with this time? It's just strange to me that the movie chose to show a lot of elements of F1 that typically F1 and the FIA try to refrain from, like making it a part of the sport or acknowledging it as a part of the sport. Like, they don't want to associate with these things in real life, but somehow they're all being shown in this movie as very central parts of the sport. Oh, another instance of this is when Joshua Pierce crashes his car. it's because of a sausage curb at Monza. And it's interesting because I thought F1 was kind of like not really acknowledging the sausage curb fiasco these days, but somehow in the movie it's a very pivotal moment in the story. But I do understand that the movie had a pretty difficult task of appeasing both F1 diehards and also appealing to casual audiences or people who don't know much about F1 in general. So I get that they needed to make the races more entertaining. And I mean, it worked. Like, the races are very entertaining. But I do want to point out that for us F1 fans, I think it's a very jarring experience to watch the sport represented in that light. And I don't know, I wonder what newer fans are going to think about it. In terms of the characters, pretty much all of them were very one-dimensional, but I guess that's also typical of these kinds of movies. Character development has basically left the chat. Sonny Hayes was pretty insufferable for the most part, and I don't think that's just because I don't like the actor, because even though I don't like the actor, he's a phenomenal actor, okay? Brad Pitt is amazing, and I think he can do a little better than this. I don't know, I feel like in Top Gun, Tom Cruise has a lot more charisma, so I don't know. I don't know if it was Brad Pitt or just the character, but something was kind of off. I feel like I couldn't really connect with this character at all. I liked the character of Joshua Pierce quite a bit, but I feel like he was kind of robbed a little bit by the story. I feel like it's centered a little too much around Sonny, and I kind of wish that Joshua had gotten a bit of like his moment of glory too. I also feel like Joshua should have won the final race, in my opinion. Maybe it's because I went into the movie expecting a Cars remake, but I feel like this movie kind of wants to have this passing of the torch moment of like the old guard passing down the knowledge to the new guard, and they're supposed to continue that legacy. But I feel like it doesn't quite achieve that. Like, maybe Joshua should have been the one to, I don't know, overtake Hayes or overtake Hamilton. You know, prove that he can also be a great driver in his own right, or prove that he learned something from Sonny and now he's carrying it out. Or I think it could have also been good if Sonny had sacrificed his win so that Joshua could win, like showing that he's learned to be a team player and he's kind of continuing his legacy or something like that. Which I guess they did kind of do that because Sonny let Joshua be the one to pass Hamilton, but then they made Joshua crash into Lewis, which I feel like that was not necessary, is what I mean. I also don't know how to feel about this whole subplot of Joshua being too concerned about social media and PR and kind of what other people think about him. And Sonny's kind of the one who shows him to not care about how people perceive him and just worry about racing and doing what he loves. Like, I think it's a really nice sentiment, and I truly wish that real F1 drivers were able to do that. Just focus on racing and not get so bogged down with PR bullshit. But the reality is that F1 drivers do need to play the PR game if they want to get anywhere, because it's become such an important part of the sport in this post-Liberty Media era. They have contract obligations and they have to appease all of their sponsors, because otherwise they will get nowhere, unless they're like Lance Stroll and they have infinite money or something. It's only really big drivers like Max Verstappen who can sort of get around their media duties a little bit and just focus on racing. But generally that's not a luxury that any driver can afford, especially someone who is in a backmarker team and is a rookie in F1. Overall, there's this very interesting dynamic between Hayes and Pierce, where Hayes is like a representative of the old glory days of Formula One of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, whereas Pierce represents modern F1. And the movie clearly advocates more for Hayes' view, but the reality of F1 is not really like that. So I don't know, I think all of that is just another moment of the F1 movie pretending that F1 is a thing that it's not, or giving a message or a moral which is nice in theory but doesn't actually translate to what real drivers are able to do. Now, going into the character of Kate McKenna, who is Kerry Condon's character, who I had a lot of thoughts about in my previous video, I think she was represented better than I expected. She's clearly portrayed as a strong, intelligent, competent person, and I did really appreciate that she sort of shows her career and her path over like her husband and her personal life. She has this side plot about how she's the first ever strategy director in F1 and she's trying to prove herself in the industry and in the sport, and it's really good. I think it's very powerful for women in Formula One or in motorsports or in sports or in engineering. I think it's nice. However, I do still think that the romance or whatever she has with Sonny Hayes is unnecessary to the movie. I know that it was added mostly because it's usually part of the formula, pun intended, of these kinds of movies, but I think in this particular case, they maybe should have thought a little more carefully about the specific context of Formula One and women in Formula One and the kind of message that a plot like this can send, especially because throughout the movie, McKenna says all these things about how she's a professional and she'd never sleep with a member of the team and she knows her professional boundaries and how dare you think that I would ever do that? And then she proceeds to get with her driver anyway. I think that made the character kind of hypocritical. Like, she was not being true to her own beliefs. In my last video, I mentioned that McKenna fucks up the strategy in one of the races, and maybe I was wrong about that. I'm not really sure what I thought that was going to entail. But she doesn't fuck up the strategy per se. It's more like she's kind of conservative about it, whereas Brad Pitt has all of these bold ideas that of course end up working. The whole Plan C situation. And here Brad Pitt's perspective does make sense because usually a backmarker team should try to experiment a little bit and be bold with strategy, because by doing something different, it might actually work. But I am a little annoyed that McKenna's presented as this very competent strategy director, and yet every time she is outdone by some guy who's been out of Formula One for 30 years. Overall, I think the intention was there with this character, but they made some choices that really kind of fumbled the bag for me. I will also add that many of you pointed me to the P1 podcast reaction to the movie or analysis of the movie, and they say basically the same things that I said, so I feel very validated about that. I'll also add a brief aside about the female mechanic subplot, where basically one of the Apex GP mechanics keeps messing up the pit stops because she doesn't really know how to use the tire gun, I guess, but throughout the movie she gets better at it. That's another moment that I thought maybe wasn't the best choice. I'm not saying that this is unrealistic or that this couldn't totally happen in real life. Like, maybe there is a female mechanic in a team who struggles with it and then gets better at it. That could totally happen. But I am saying that it kind of sends a particular message when the only mechanic who is struggling to do the work also happens to be the only female mechanic on the team. If there had been other female mechanics at Apex GP who are doing fine on their job, or if there had been male mechanics who are also struggling, then it would have been fine. But because it's the only woman and she's the only one struggling, it does feel a little bit like a gender thing. However, I will say, in principle, like in theory, I think the inclusion of a subplot to do with the mechanic team is sensational. That's one more thing I have in favor of the film. It shows what it takes to run a Formula One team from every perspective, not just the perspective of the drivers or the engineers or the more managerial or business end of things of the team principals, for example, but also from the side of the mechanics, who I feel sometimes get a little bit ignored, but they actually do fundamental work in ensuring that things go smoothly during races. So I like that the movie has a moment of appreciation for the work that mechanics do in F1. It's just the particular storyline that they chose or the way they chose to go about it that kind of grinds my gears a little bit. On Javier Bardem's character, I have one thing to say. His name was constantly butchered in the movie, and I am so upset about it. Everybody kept calling him Rubén, but considering that Bardem is Spanish and his character was Spanish because he spoke a bunch of Spanish in the movie, I have to imagine that his name is actually Rubén, and none of the characters made an effort to say it right. And it really bothered me. And I feel like this type of thing generally doesn't happen in F1. Like, I think people generally do make an effort to pronounce everybody's names as accurately as possible because F1 is such an international sport by nature. Anyway, I'm obviously overthinking this one, like it's not that deep, but as a Spaniard, it did just kind of bother me a little. Lastly, Peter Banning, or whatever his name was, this guy, his part in the second half of the movie was super forced, in my opinion. It feels as though halfway through making the movie, the producers were like, wait, we forgot to include a villain in this. So they came up with this whole subplot about the forged FIA documents, and he actually just hired Sonny Hayes to try to make the team fail so that he could be team principal. It just felt like it wasn't necessary, or at least if they wanted to include it, they should have maybe foreshadowed it a little bit better, but it just came totally out of left field, and I don't know, it was just kind of random. Finally, let me quickly discuss driver cameos because I know that's what all of you are actually excited about. Sadly, folks, I think we need to tone down the excitement because it really was not all that interesting. Basically, besides Alonso, none of the drivers had speaking lines as far as I can recall. I did think it was interesting though that the team principals actually do get a lot of cameos and a lot of speaking lines too, at least in comparison to the drivers. And I wonder why they made that choice. Like, did they think that maybe team principals are more experienced with PR? I don't even think that's the case. That being said, I thought all of the team principal cameos were really good, especially the Gunther Steiner cameos. The entire theater died laughing every time he showed up, and I thought that was beautiful. But otherwise, I think my favorite driver cameo was Charles Leclerc shaking his head in disappointment at Sonny Hayes. I thought that was hilarious. I want gifs of that immediately. Overall, if I had to rate the movie out of 5 stars, I think it's a solid 3. Passing, but barely. It's pretty fun if you're a casual fan or if you're just trying to watch something fun and a little mindless over the summer. But if you go in with the F1 fan mentality and you're gonna try to be nitpicky about it, then you're probably gonna have a bad time. And like I said, I'm not super happy with some of the character choices that were made, but I think as a mass media product, it does succeed at doing what it set out to do, which was to attract more attention to F1 and potentially garner some new fans. And in terms of the visuals and the actual way that the races were filmed, this is probably the best racing movie we've ever had. Do I recommend watching it? Meh. I think the movie theater experience is really nice from an audio-visual perspective, so if that's something you're really interested in, then I do recommend watching it. But otherwise, if you're looking for a good story or a good message or just something interesting to say about Formula One, then it's definitely not worth your money. But then again, these are just my thoughts, so it's really up to you. And it's also up to you to tell me what you thought of the movie. So if you've watched it, let me know your thoughts. And if you haven't watched it or you don't plan to watch it, also let me know. And also just a heads up, I know that Spa is coming up, but unfortunately I don't think I'll be able to do a race review. I know, literally the best race of the year and with a forecast of rain, and I don't get to talk about it. Insane. If I end up being able to make it, I will make it, but just expect that there won't be a video. And that way you'll be really happy when you do get a notification, which by the way, if you haven't hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, what are you doing right now? Stay fueled, and he's right behind me, isn't he?